I've been delegated to standing for the chairperson of our historic society, who's unavoidably absent tonight. So it is a very simple and very pleasant duty for me to perform. Initially, to make sure that I extend a very warm Boris welcome to each and every one of you. It's great to see such a fine crowd here tonight. It is a beautiful May evening, and I suppose the topic that we're going to listen to is poignant and meaningful in every sense to all of us. I suppose it's reasonably true to say that everybody that's sitting down here tonight would hardly be here if their ancestors hadn't lived through that certain period that Johnny is going to talk about. You're all obviously interested in history, so therefore John Connors, my neighbour and friend, doesn't need much introduction. Johnny, as we fondly know him, is highly regarded in historical terms. He has many productions to his credit, and he has a particular interest in history that's of a local nature. I suppose, I don't know who coined the phrase neighbours and neighbours' children, but I associate Johnny Connors as maybe his next door neighbour as neighbours and neighbours' children. So without much further ado, I hand you over to Johnny. I'm absolutely certain that you'll be enlightened and have a tremendous evening's discussion with Johnny and in listening to him. It's also only appropriate for me to say that later on in the evening, Johnny will introduce you to a lovely lady who's sharing our company here tonight, Sophia from the Ukraine. And Johnny extended shade and shelter to that lovely lady and her parents in one of their darkest hours. So I'm very proud of Johnny for that, as I'm sure you all are too. Johnny, over to you and thanks.
Thanks, David. And just to tell you the story about the relationship between the ladies and our family, Connorses. Timmy's father was a only son, but I had an uncle Phil, and John Delaney and Phil Connors were actually closer than brothers. And Phil Connors, he joined the British Army the outbreak before the Second World War. He was wounded in Dunkirk. And I often remember the conversation my father would have with Timmy's father about that. And these are the things, you know, that I suppose bring us together as a community, these kind of relationships, you know. And that's, I suppose, recent history. That was in the 1930s, them two men would have known each other, I mean, great friends, you know. Like, if you went back 10 years before that, you had the War of Independence. Before that, you had the Land League, the Famine rising, the 48 Rebellion, and before that then, the Famine. And I suppose the Famine of 1845 to 1849, actually, I suppose it really filtered on quite longer than that, you know. I suppose, to me, I always kind of think of two things that define Irish history, is the famine and the Civil War. You know, like the seismic change that took place in Ireland, because of those, you know, were immense. They shaped our history, shaped who we are today. Now, I was talking there one time to people who were doing a video production here in Borrisoleigh, and they asked what effect did the famine have here in Borrisoleigh. And, you know, I wasn't really able to tell them a lot about it. But in the course of, I suppose, my interest in history, I go to National Archives quite a bit. And any file in the National Archives that contains the word Borrisoleigh, Johnny has looked at. So, I've been there quite a bit. And that's how I've come to learn quite a bit about the famine. Stuff that's generally unknown. So, I first deal with the famine, and then I talk about an event that, to me, if it was to happen today in another country to make national headlines, the eviction and the dispossession of 470 people from their homes. And that happened in the townslands of Cullehill, Corricale, Mount Canaan, those townslands. So let's begin. The famine, the famine, I suppose, initially caused by the plantation right, and it may go that came in the wind from Eastern Europe, from that area, from Latvia or whatever. How true that is, I don't know. I don't very much it was the first famine or the first plague to strike Ireland, but however. Now, the first signs of trouble were seen when the pits were opened, the potato pits were opened in the early winter of 45. And the state of the potato pits, the potatoes were rotten, and there was a meeting of the gentry called in Thomas to discuss this, to discuss what they would do. Now, the meeting of the gentry, the report said that George Ryan Vigil was elevated in the chair and it's much acclaim, so that they had their own way of doing things, I suppose. But now, Mr. Lester for Turtle and Mills, he made out the cause of the potato plague began 5 years earlier, when the potatoes were harvested, dug out during a heavy frost, and he said they weren't perfectly ripe, and they were pitted when they were hot, and because of that, disease that emanated from that was the cause of the problem. Now, there was a Mr. Kilburn also at the meeting, and he done a survey around Thurles, and he said out of every 30 stone of potatoes he examined the Thurles market, he described 20 stone per inch. So 2/3 of the potato crop at that stage had failed. That was in November, the 4th of November of 1945. Now, Samuel Cook of Brownstown, a cousin of our Cook Sale, he had some pretty noteworthy things to say about it, you know. But you could see the trouble that was going to arise, because the poorer people, that was their daily diet. David Broderick spoke here, and I think he said that the average man was a 10 pound of potatoes in one day. To nearly a stone of potatoes in a day anyway. So he, stood up at the meeting and said, what can we do with the poor? And he made a very vibrant proposal, which were very far-sighted on his behalf. And he said that the government should import corn, open up corn levels. And if the corn was not needed, that the government then could become corn agents and sell it on again. But his idea kind of gained no traction at the meeting. And you could see why. Because, like, a meeting of gentry in Thurles was hardly going to be affected by too much by the loss of potatoes. They had other things to sustain themselves. And something you'll find out then through the 5 years of the famine, some word that's referred to very often is a visitation of Providence. And Charles Trevelyan, he said that this was a visitation of Providence that was sent to teach the Irish a lesson. So with those kind of attitudes, you can see how things would deteriorate. Mr. Beamish came from Cork, dated December 45, and he provided substantial abatements. Now, the abatement that he provided was something like 15 shillings in the pound. But I suppose that kind of begs the question, for the person who had no pound, how much of value was that? Beamish owned the land, he said, well, the church in Ilee is in Drumfield, he owned that in it. He lived in Beaufort in Cork. So he was pretty well away from it all, he was. And then Sub-Inspector John Malone, he sends a report to Dublin Castle on the 1st of March 1846. And
in continuation of our report of the 16th ultimo relating to the potato crop, I beg to say that the disease is daily increasing and the greater part of the poor of the neighbourhood are nearly out of that possession. Some just have potatoes for seed are requiring a pound a barrel of 24 stone. I fear that from this exorbitant price that a great deal of ground will be wasted, as the poor will not be able to give such a price. In continuance of my report on the first instalment relative to the potato crop, I beg leave to report that many people in my district are now opening their pits, the greater part of which are rotten. On the 10th instant, I travelled a distance of 16 miles through my district, and the fields which I passed where potatoes grew were most alarming to see the quality of potatoes which were lost. I further beg to remark that the labouring class in this town and in Templemore are in a most destitute state, and they have little or no employment and consequently unable to purchase provisions, and the potatoes are now from 4 to 5 pence per stone. I fear much that if they don't get immediate employment, they will take provisions by force from such as hold a supply. I make this statement to show how things stand in this district at present.
So you can see from that report how quickly things have deteriorated. That was somebody strength in the Lord, the base here in Borrisolane, remember the right constabulary. Now, you see, of course, like when the problem comes, people think it won't last for too long, and people can feel pretty generous the first year, whatever, like. And a number of traders in Borrisolane, they advise people not to sell their oats on, to keep their seed. It was Philip Carroll, he was an immigration agent, and he was very generous at that time. He told people to hold on to what stores they had. When a year had passed and things returned to normal, people could deal with these things again. But of course, that wasn't to last. And it was Dawson they also made a similar gesture, and they employed their chief enforcer, a man called John Showendice, to do that. But within a year, all that had changed. Now, the first evictions began in Knockkelly. You go to across Knockkelly, there's a police barracks there on the left, as we go on the left-hand side, and down there, Captain Andrew de Burke lived down there, and he was the first in the district to enforce an eviction, and that was reported in a letter to the Freeman's Journal.
Sir, being well aware of your kind sympathy for the oppressed tenantry of the country and of Tipperary in particular, and from the good arising from the advocacy of your own intelligent and widely circulated journal, I am induced to inform you of an act of landlordism by a middleman in the parish of Glenkeen. The facts of the case are simple. On Saturday last, the Sub-Sheriff's Deputy, Mr. Gasson, with a party of police, accompanied by a superannuated sergeant of the old Castlelottery Yeomanry, proceeded to the lands at Knockkelly, the property of Captain A. de Burgh, late of the Spanish service, for the purpose of executing a hebra, in other words, an ejectment of tenant of about 70 years of age from the land he has been reclaiming and improving by the sweat of his brow for the last 30 years, and for which he paid the great rent, I believe, of £1 10 shillings per acre. It is mountainous land, but alas, being unable to pay a higher rent, the executioners of the law entered the wretched cabin of Conway, and a bailiff put out a few articles of furniture, turf, etc., before and excited people who had assembled on the ground. He is expelled from his house and few acres. Fact is, he has no lease, otherwise he could not be ejected, having paid his last May rent, as the following receipt from Sergeant Shoulderdice will testify. Received from Thomas Conway by the hands of his wife, the sum of £2, 5 shillings and 3 pence, being half a year's rent due out of his holding at Knockakelly, through Andrew de Burgh, Esquire, ordered to be paid by the Judge of Assizes, due and ending on the 1st day of May 1846, dated this 31st day of July 1846. John Shodas. Your readers will perceive that it was before a judge of the Assizes the captain obtained the Hebra, the barrister in the first instance having dismissed the case. To talk of preserving the public peace under the circumstances set forth in these communications, with wolfish famine and black despair facing an excitable population, are ridiculous. What the great bulk of the people want are protection and employment, and unless they are afforded these, it is impossible to rely on their forbearance, notwithstanding the evident desire that almost universally prevails to bear their burdens with patience, and to give a trial to the measures of relief promised by the government.
So you can say there, the victories began, the state, the mindset of the people. And, you see, the Burgh actually didn't know any land, but he was a landlord. It was Oshawa's land. And the Burgh had 360 something acres rented, and he had that rented out to small parcels of land to tenant farmers. So when the potato crop failed, poor Conway couldn't meet his £2, 10 shillings and 3 pence rent, and he was evicted. And this is how his fortune and the hardship escalated. The measures promised by the government actually came too late. These were the relief schemes they were, and they were given to people when they had a low way, unable to do much, unable to work. The spirit broke into the people. There was a gentleman travelling around Ireland, and he noticed the state of the country, what was happening in places. And he came from Templemore, and he said about the parish of Drum, and he spoke about a butler from Dublin that had a great amount of land, an absentee landlord in Drum. And he, at that stage, hadn't demanded his May rent, but the people in Drum were living in fear that his agent would come to look for the rent, because if they did, they would not have it, and then they would also be evicted. Now, he came to Borrisoleigh, and the description he gave of Borrisoleigh was thankfully a bit different to what it is today. He called it dreadful and miserable, and the darkest, blackest place it would meet. And he said the misery that he saw was actually frightening. And here's an excerpt of what he wrote at the time.
While waiting for the car, I was accosted by a pale, sickly-looking man in whose face hunger was written. He was begging for some coppers to feed his wife and 4 starving children. I went to the hut where lived the man with his family, and there they were, the 4 children, the oldest just 8 years, standing round a tub full of turnips and devouring them with almost savage ferocity. I took my leave, unable no longer to dwell upon the scene. The only comment I will make is this. I never, before my present tour, felt not to speak of human beings, using anything uncharitable, until I saw the children eating. The man told me he would have died of hunger long since, but for the goodness of the local priest.
He made a further comment in his writing. It was about the character of the people that he met. And when he was in Borrisoleigh, he left his coat somewhere, and he went on then in his jar of car or whatever, and someone followed him from Borrisoleigh to give back his coat, and there was somebody in it, and like it shows that the uprightness and the character of the people. Like even though that man was surviving on the charity of the local priest. Now, the 15th of April, 46, a meeting was held at Morley's Hotel for 6 marks Morley's Hotel in Borrisoleigh. Staples Pub. Michael Marley. And William Morris, our PP, and Alexander Hoops, he was rector of the Church of Ireland. He resided in Glenkeen. He was they were the joint chairman. Stephen Ryan, who had the mill over at the Cream, Milltown, he was also on the committee. He was a very able operator. Dr. Pinchon was also there, and Harlan was from Summer Hill. I suppose anybody who was anybody was on it. Now, they made an appeal to the absentee landlords. Port Allen would have been the biggest, but North Port Allen wanted more city. He would have been the biggest landlord. But he didn't come at the first invitation anyway. But two did come, Peter Barrow and Walter Ronahan. Now, they owned it, they had very little property actually in the parish. Most of their estate is in the parish of Drum, but however they can. Which I suppose begs the question if they'd been invited to go to Drum would have went there, you know. But at that time, Sub-Inspector Malone sent his report to Dublin Castle, and he spoke about 150 labourers marching on the village, and they were looking for employment. And they called to Father Morrison's house, and Harling's and Summerhill, and Carling's, and John Willington of Killiscale Castle. Now, they didn't meet any of those, but apparently were peaceful enough. And they said they were not armed with anything and conducted themselves in a peaceable manner. I talked to some of them, and they told me they had been, for the last 2 or 3 days, surviving on 1 meal a day. The Inspector General, from my knowledge of the neighbourhood they came from, I have reason to believe them. They also told me they would die of hunger. They would not die of hunger while there was provisions in the country, and that they were willing to work if they got employment. And Malone went on, he said, I fear much that if something's not done to employ them, there will be bad work, as the principal part of the people are in the deplorable state for want of provision. Now, that report, Malone, refers to the village that we stand in now. So, you know, it paints a pretty bleak picture of how things stood. Now, you can see not everybody was going to follow the gentleman with the court. You know, self-survival is the first instinct it is, and this is, you know.
In the vicinity of Borrisolee, Castle Otway, etc., the robberies of poultry, turnips, potatoes, and the slaughter of sheep are exceedingly numerous, and every day becoming more prevalent, which may be attributed, in many instances, to the destitute condition of the people. On the brow of every honest family sits terror. When they go to repose and rest their weary limbs at night, they are apprehensive about an attempt being made on their property before morning, or at least plunder of some portion of their properties. The doors of the farmers' houses might be seen frequently closed and barred during the day, and at evening it is with great precaution mingled with fear that the door would be opened to admit a friend or near relative.
So, you know, when hunger, really, you know, when hunger comes, you know, to survive it, to continue on to the next day. Like, so, we said about stealing a sheep, you know, a man called stealing a sheep is going to end up in Australia, so, if not worse. So, there was pretty harsh penalties for these things. But these are the things that people have done to survive. Now, on the 18th of September 46, the extraordinary presentment session was held in the courthouse. Now, what was a presentment session? It was a meeting to relief works, the public works, to see what works could be garnered for your particular area, you know, to relieve the distress of the people. Now, you say, all this was paid for by the land tax. This is something that really caused problems. Is the relief for the Irish famine was not paid out of English exchequer. It was paid by the land tax. This was the tax that landlords paid. Now you can see the problem here straight away. Like the absentee landlords how they spent their time mostly, I believe, was whining and dining in England and gambling on cockfighting. Apparently that was their hobby. So they weren't going to really have much money if the pyramid of ownership, Portanet at the top, and then the pyramid going down. And when the man at the bottom had nothing, he had nothing to give to the man above him. And so it was that by the time he reached our Portanet, he had very, very little. Now, it was a case of every man for himself, you see. There was 17,000 acres in the parish of Glenkeen. 7,000 of that would have been, I suppose, the prime land, and that's where the tax was collected. So kind of what we have, we hold. So why should we on the good land support people on the bad land? You know. So these are kind of divisions that these things cause in society. You know, of course, fragmentation of society. Now, there was a number of public works. One was the road up there by Killamine, and the Clodagh line as it was called. And there was actually money, £2,310. That was there, but it wasn't actually drawn down. And what was the reason for that? The reason for that was it was suspended to allow for the saving of the hay. Now, that seems a kind of odd, really, that to be suspended for people to save the hay. Like, if they were saving the hay, you'd imagine they could have cows, or they'd have milk, they'd have meat. But that wasn't the case, it wasn't, of course. But there was a cohort of farmers, well-to-do, and the poor and destitute had to labour for them. And when that was over then they were entitled to avail of the government scheme to support themselves and keep themselves alive. So again, that's kind of hierarchy of ownership. Now, you never know Famine roads they're dead long and straight, you know, and a lot of them are of course built without purpose. And there's one up there from Boolaban down to towards Greenland down there. So that one was built, and that was going to Dosma land. And at the meeting in the courthouse, John Shoredyce, the Dosma chief enforcer, he said, not only will the road be objected to, but compensation will be sought. So you can see where that will be going. And Mr. Cook of Fort William, John Cook of Fort William, he proposed the draining of land as a more viable proposition, which is probably right too, but of course what did he do? He proposed the draining of his own land. He did. Again, each man for himself, and there was a call made then to open meat depots. Now, you see, there was a problem with this, in that, like, how many meat depots were there? It made no difference. People had no money to buy the meal. And that time, Ireland, I suppose, worked on a method and a barter system. And money was really non-existent. So the man with Indian corn wasn't wanting to do that sort of money. You know, he was a businessman. Now, Inspector John Malone, he wrote to Dublin Castle for them to write their report Ireland, for God's sake to come and do something. Such was the want in the parish. Now, Lord Portanet came. He came from England, he did, and he came. There was a meeting held in the Temperance Hall in Orsalee. I don't know where that was. But it was held in the Temperance Hall, and his tenants presented him with what they call an address.
My Lord, we, the undersigned tenants and residents of your Lordship's estates in the counties of Tipperary and Limerick, beg to express the gratification we feel at your presence amongst us, and to tender to you a sincere and warm welcome on the occasion of your Lordship's early visit to this portion of your hereditary estate. The remembrance of those kind feelings that ever existed between your Lordship's ancestors and their tenantry in this county naturally awakens in our breast sentiments of respect and attachment for the representative of that ancient and noble family. These sentiments are heightened by the sense of moral obligation which has prompted you to withdraw for a season from the interesting and attractive scenes which adorn your residence in England, for the purpose of discharging your duties as an Irish landlord and to fix your abode in this country, under circumstances which we are aware call for extraordinary extensions and great sacrifices on the part of your Lordship. Your Lordship's presence at the present juncture and during the second awful visitation by Providence, by which the staple food of the poorer classes has been destroyed, gives an assurance that you can meet difficulties as well as sacrifice comforts in the performance of your duties attendant upon the elevated and influential position to which you have been called. Your Lordship's first step as an Irish landlord has to begin to diminish the number of absentees, and we trust the movement will be followed by a model by many of their body who have not as yet acted upon the acknowledged maxim that property has its duty as well as its rights. We confidently expect that your benevolent extensions and enlightened example will be attended with the best social results upon every class and will lead to the physical, intellectual and moral improvement of the agricultural and labouring population connected with your Lordship's estates in Ireland. Here follows the signatory of the tenantry.
I found that in the National Archives, but the next page must have been missing because I would have liked to find it, but who knows signature as well. But from reading that, our connotation is that when we mention a tenant, is that I have a certain image in my mind. Outside the cabin door, the bailiffs, the bathroom lamp, all of this. Like the people who wrote that address, they were actually tenants, but they were landlords in their own right. So this is when we got to we said that the political scene in Ireland, like John Lanning was an MP for Cashin, like he represented tenants' rights, but wasn't the man living on the stone of potatoes today, it wasn't. There's a covert message in it too, there's the absentee landlord, and this was a big problem. It was. As long as these guys got their money, they didn't care what went on in their estates. They were scarcely aware of what property they had. Portanica's estate filtered out, I think, from some of the monarchs. I think Ormond, if I'm not mistaken. Got by bribery and corruption as well, of course. Now, of course, a bit like St. Paul's letter to the Romans, the Romans needed it right back as well. And poor Tarleton, he did let us down. He didn't disappoint us a bit. He put pen to paper and he got back to us.
Gentlemen, I wish to thank you most cordially for this kind and truly gratifying address which you have been pleased to present me with on my first coming to visit my estates in this county. I assure you it is of equal pleasure and gratification to myself that I shall meet you here this day, and I trust that if my life is spared, that this shall not be the last time we shall meet. My only regret is that it should be under the circumstances that not only this county but the whole of Ireland is at present suffering. As far as I am able, you may rely upon my most ready assistance at this crisis, and I'm only sorry that under the peculiar circumstances under which my estates are now for the present placed must prevent the doing all I would wish. I have succeeded, I trust, in rescuing by great exertion these estates from the severe litigation that was pressing upon them, and when once the control of them is in my hands, you shall, I trust, no occasion to regret the change. I have come to Ireland solely to become acquainted with all my tenantry, so that in future I may be of real use and benefit to them. I have again to thank you most sincerely for the expression of your kind feeling toward me. Port Arlington, the 11th of October 1846.
Now, you can see from that he had little difficulties of his own he had. at that time, his estate, the seat of the Port Arlington family was Emo Court, and that was threatened with litigation because they couldn't meet their debts. They couldn't. Now, it's amazing that they couldn't meet their debts because he owned it 3/4 of Borrisaville, but he also wanted to track the land from Emily to Limerick Junction, 3 miles wide and 21 miles long, and that would it was. And when it was sought after, it was described in the selling literature as the Golden Vein. So, and some of the best land in Ireland, but apparently he wasn't making great use of it. Now, Black 47, I suppose the height of the famine, and it was. You know, families stepped in with all this dreadful severity, you know.
Sir, words can hardly contain the extent of the distress that prevails here. Famine is setting in with all its dreadful severity. About 6 people have died within the last 10 days in this narrow locality, and a great number of the destitute are unemployed. If another presentment session be not immediately proclaimed here, if the people who under the circumstances possess unexampled, almost slavish patience, be not forthwith set to earn some sort of subsistence, universal mortality must be the result. Our present distress is only alleviated by the energy and activity of the excellent man who has charge of our locality under the Board of Works. I mean Alfred Gannon Esquire.
It was signed by JMC, and I just wondered, was that another one for Alfred Gannon, another name? Was the place is fairly lavish for him. Now, he was a pretty good kind of guy, he was, because he was what you would describe now as the county engineer, and he was the man who portion where this work would be done. But like the distress was so overwhelming that these public schemes were of no value. Like they really did not to alleviate the hardship. Now, Alexander Hoos was the church minor rector. He lived in Glenkeen, and his church was where the graveyard is here now. Now, like it's amazing things that can happen. Before Hoos came to Glenkeen, he was rector in either New Chapel or Moortown Kirk. One of those down near Clonmel. And while he was there, he was involved in very much in the tithe wars not in the most charitable way, because when people didn't pay their tithe, you know, that was direct to the Protestant, the established church. When they didn't pay that, he took them to court, and then as well as having to pay whatever the tax was, they were stuck with legal costs as well. But apparently when he came to Glenkeen and when the famine began, he was very, very active in all of that. And it would appear that you know, that what he witnessed daily in his ministry really got him upset, you know, with fatal consequences to himself.
It has been this day our painful duty to record in our usual obituary list the death of Reverend Alexander Hoops, rector of Glenkeen, County of Tipperary, which took place on Sunday last to the inexpressible grief of his family and the irredeemable loss of his afflicted parishioners. But the occasion deserves a more prominent notice, and we feel we ought not permit a good man to part from among us without a brief note of the public sorrow and a passing allusion to the merits which call it forth. The reverend gentleman spent and lost his life in the cause of the poor, among whom his lot was cast. He died broken down in health and spirits, in mind and body, by the harassing scenes which he witnessed and partook in, among the starving poor, in whose behalf his warmest sympathies were animated. Previous to the carrying out of the government's latest measures of relief, he was daily to be seen distributing with his own hands meal procured by private subscription to the famished multitude around him. In ministering to their wants, the interests of his own family were almost disregarded. Subsequently, the Reverend gentleman filled the office of chairman to the Relief Committee. Advanced as he was in years and possessing an oversensitive mind, its onerous duties proved too much for him. He was sinking beneath their weight, until, by the advice of his friends, he resigned the office. But his soul was not thereby relieved from the intense pressure of anxiety, and his name can now be added to the long list of generous men who have fallen victim to their devotedness and who, in showing mercy to others, have had no mercy on themselves.
You can see from that, he was, an upright man, committed to his, to cause the self and the poor and the destitute. Just something of interest, he demanded his own life. Alexander Hoops, I don't know, his father, his grandfather, was on the jury that convicted Father Sheehy, and he died under tragic circumstances. And he had a son, Alexander, and his burial, his death record, he died in the workhouse in Famine, listed as a distressed gentleman. So, that misfortune is what followed him. But again, a man who done chores and work at the time of need that history has forgotten. So hopefully these things, record and remember these people in some way. Now, the effects of the cause of that, the population dropped by 35%. I was down in New Ross yesterday, Dunbrody. The guy there said that prior to the fact the population of America was 9 million people. At that time the population of America was 18 million people. So that's worth thinking about. Someone told me here, some of the people in the research, that the population of certain towns that Cullen and those dropped by far more than that. Now, starvation played a huge part, of course. People died of hunger, died of illness, died of disease. Emigration contributes much to that, but also migration. And when I go to Glenkeen graveyard, and I see the number of people from outside the parish who buried there burial rights, Now, a number of them, they say, Derry Burke, his people moved from Borrisolee to Kenny's. They moved from Borrisolee to... But, you see, when the famine was over, there were still people needed to work the land. And the wire in Templederry, he gave leases to people, not to rejuvenate the land and to get working again. Now, the Conservative government of Robert Peel in England were certainly more proactive to relieve the distress of the Irish people. But then there was a change of government, and Russell's government, a policy of laissez-faire, where you do not interfere with the market. And again, much of this came down to, like Charles Trevelyan, that this was something that was sent by God to teach the Irish a lesson, and to interfere with that would be blasphemy. And as strange as that may sound today, these people actually believed that they did. They saw the Irish as a subhuman race. The Gregory Clause. The Gregory Clause was that anyone with more than a quarter of an acre of land, anyone with more than a quarter acre of land was not eligible to work on a relief scheme. At a meeting held in Borrisolee, it was the local relief committee, they decreed that any of the poor who are not resident in the village for 2 years should not be entitled to work on the relief scheme. As much as these things were worth, the extension of the Poor Law Act, that was that famine relief was paid for by Irish land tax, and when the man at the bottom couldn't pay the man higher up, the system collapsed. The barter system, the mayhem, it is I suppose you know how it works, like I help you trying to hay, you know, whatever, like, you know, they take this, and we still do business today, you know, thank God, but that time it had fatal consequences. Money was non-existent. Now, the final available report that I found is that Famine goes on to May of 1850, and O'Mara O'Connor, he was a busy man, he was. O'Mara O'Connor was a busy man, he had a lot of inquests in it, and the final one he had in Morris Leaders I found pertaining to that period was a lady called Hannah Peters, it was by Davis adduced, it appears that the deceased had been suffering from extreme destitution and privation for some time in a cold and cheerless hunger. You know, it says it all, like, don't it? The jury returned a verdict that the deceased died from exhaustion and cold, the result of want of sufficient food. You know, like the ornate language does nothing to hide the cold, the callousness behind a situation like that. The Cullen Hill Victuals of 1850. Just when I was in the National Archives and I saw this, I picked up them pieces from the newspaper archives, and it really struck me, you know, this must have been, you know, not only in Tipperary, like the Nation newspaper, the Freeman's Journal, the national newspapers at the time reported on this, and reported on it quite vocally, quite strongly. So not only would it have been a local affair, but also a national, you know, a national affair. And sadly myself, I did not know much about it until I discovered, you know, I discovered the archives. So really it's something of such proportions that it should not be forgotten, it should never be forgotten. Now, O'Driscoll, he was from Cork, and he had land around Baladaff, Corralee, that area had. And you can see there, in September 49, the move he made. And it actually gives a list of the people who were evicted. They had Patrick Burke, a wife and 9 children, Martin Ryan, his wife and child, William Gleeson, the widow Diane, the widow Connell, Martin Burke. You know, and you take, we said, Diane and Connell. They're not names that are associated with Baladaff anymore. You know, like, so what became of these people? You know, this is something that's worth that. Martin Ryan was re-enlisted and paid a portion of his arrears. You know, so that was the first in that particular area. Now, April of 1850 saw signs of recovery, and there was an inquest held. Again, Mr. O'Mara held an inquest. A man called Ryan, I didn't give his first name. He was evicted from his land, and he wouldn't take a ticket to the workhouse because people dreaded the workhouse. They'd be buried on. He said he was sooner die in the ditch than enter the workhouse. And he died. His body was found at the barracks in Knockkelkenny, at Knockkelkenny Cross. Now, at this time, 3 gentlemen from Park Brothers, from the Parks are quite an estate of land. You know where Castleknock Wood is, Castleknock over there. They owned all that. They owned the Valley down in Killaloe, and they also owned the land down O'Brien's Bridge. So they were pretty well to do. They were. Now, at that time, Ottawas were experiencing growing difficulties, and in stepped the Parkers to take advantage of that. And of course, they weren't too long there, but an unoccupied house burned that corner. And what was the reason for that? The reason for that was a man was evicted, he went to the workhouse, and the property was burned in case he returned and took possession of it. So, now, the eviction was occurring. What was all this about? They said, tenants sowing potatoes to feed themselves, and a little corn to pay the rent or something like that. Like, it was in a distressed state that the country was in. These fellows were, you know, that was going to make a profit for any landlord. So the profit was to be found by rearing cattle. And it was always a market for this, especially to feed the soldiers of the British Army. And it was in, I think it was the last day of July of 1950 when it was, of all the things I read about Borussia, you know, the hardships and misfortunes that I've studied and read about, this to me would rank amongst the greatest of what the victories of Colin.
Friday last, the romantic locality of Colahill near Borussia was the theatre of the most soul-harrowing scene. This property has lately come into the possession of Mr. John Parker of Ballycolleton near Nina, and wishing to get rid of small holdings and amalgamate farms, he issued a Hebra, and to carry out his intentions was, on this day, accompanied by his brother and his law agent, Mr. Daxon of Nina. At 8:30 they appeared on the land with a gang of about 20 of the notorious levellers of Nina. At 9 o'clock, the worthy sub-inspector, Mr. Malone, with about on his way to open the commission in Nina, with Deputy Mr. Gasson and his chief clerk, Mr. Burrows, also arrived. It was truly an awful sight. The poor rate collector with his seal of office Mr. Burrows, the chief clerk, with the Crowbar Brigade, with half the police, filed to the southern district of the ancient castle and levelled 11 houses and turned the poor inmates out upon the highway. The Messrs. Parker and Mr. Carson and a party of police, under the sub-inspector, took the northern without success, and melancholy to behold, in a few hours, 470 human beings were disposed from the town's lands of Colahill, Coracale, Carrigaline, Coralee and the bog at Moncanaan. Of these 470, 199 were readmitted as caretakers. The remaining 241 were left out under the clemency of the weather.
For 470 people to be dispossessed and turned out to elements in one day, you know, it shows that, you know, the cruelty of that mindset that prevailed. Now, needless to say, the Freeman Journal and the Nation newspaper were pretty vocal about all of this as well. And these are some of the headlines. The many more I picked out these two. You know, the nation, depopulation flourishes and the potato decays. With the probable destruction of one, the other readily accomplishes its object. And as said about the Crowbar Brigade, a well-disciplined, active corps of landlord officers, their contribution to the workhouse and wayside are on a liberal scale. So it gives, you know, a feel of, you know, what was happening in the country at that time in 1850. Just about the bog in Mount Canaan, the victories from there. A namesake of my own, a contact with me there a couple of years ago, John Connors, and he lives in some place